super excited that we get to do this. I think it's the world's first purely local first dedicated conference. So thank you so much for all of you for coming. So I've been working on local first related things for the last 2.5 years, and I've been exploring all sorts of corners, going deep on some things, going broad on some things. And the common theme for all of this is me working on a new music app. And I want to talk a bit about why I'm building a new music app and some of the interesting things, how I'm building it. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Johannes Schickling. I'm actually living here in Berlin, almost walking distance from here. And fun fact, 5 years ago, I've done another event here, which was the first Prisma conference. Since in the past, I've been the founder of Prisma, but for the last few years, I've been working on Overtone and some of the pieces that are the building blocks of Overtone, such as LiveStore, and I'm also doing a bit of consulting on the side. And as you might have guessed, as I'm building a music app, I care about music, and I get to combine my care for music with my care for software. So also a quick plug, a couple of months ago, I started a new podcast to deepen my experience with Local First even further, Local First FM. I've already had the honor of having some of you on the podcast, and so if you're not familiar with that yet, maybe you want to check it out. So in this talk, I want to start out sharing my reasons why I'm building a new music app and why it's local first, some of the lessons learned of building it, and some of the challenges that I'm still facing day to day. Might have some solution ideas, might not, so this will be a great foundation for further conversations. So why build a music app and why should it be local first? So a very simple reason for that is really a nice combination of some of my deepest passions that I have. I grew up with music, always surrounded by music, and it's like one of the purest forms of joy for me on a daily basis. But now I get to combine it with another deep passion I have, which is great software, particularly local first software. So starting with the music part of it. So who of you has their own music collection? All right. Who of you is still maintaining it on a weekly, regular basis? Okay, that's more than I thought, since this is where my music collection really started back in the days with Winamp. And at some point, I got a MacBook, etc., and migrated all of my music collection to iTunes and so on. And I spent dozens of hours, probably each week, just curating the ID3 tags, curating my library. And the music collection just meant so much to me. But I would say today, music has kind of lost its home. Like Winamp, iTunes, I consider that to be the home for my music collection, maybe next to some vinyls that were on my shelf. Today, there's more music than ever, but I would say it's also just spread across so many places. So I listen to a lot of music in different places. This is how my art might look like, where I listen to music on, let's say, BBC Radio 1 Essential Mix. I buy music on Bandcamp. I listen to music on YouTube, SoundCloud, Spotify, etc. And those all feel like very fragmented experiences. So that doesn't feel great. There's no particular place where all of my music lives. And even I don't consider all of this music that I care about to be part of my collection. I want to actually, if it's possible, own it, support an artist, but that's super hard. And I think the more music there is, I think our consumption behavior as music fans, has also gone down a bit. And for most people, music is being devalued, and that also goes at the expense of artists. And things are getting even weirder with Web3 platforms trying to fix some of that, but also AI generated music now. So I want to have a home for music. And so that's sort of a longing I have, and one of the reasons why I'm building Overtone. So Overtone is a local first music app. Think about it like a third-party email client, but a third-party client for wherever your music lives. I want to integrate it with as many streaming services and other music sources as possible. You should be able to bring your own music collection, whether it lives in Dropbox or somewhere else. And I care about it being really fast. I want to make it flexible to support different use cases, for example, support DJs as well. And I want to enable all the benefits of local first. So I've been working on this for the last 2.5 years. I kept making promises when it's available. I stopped doing so, but it's just getting closer, and I have a wait list now. And so maybe starting out with one aspect of local first that was really the initial challenge for me, since I've been building web apps for more than the last decade. And web apps, while it's easier than ever to create software this way, I think we've also traded in some of the qualitative aspects that more native software provides, particularly if you spread everything across the cloud. And so one of the ideals of local first is no spinners or no all loading states, etc. And so this is more what you all are probably used to on a daily basis with Spotify. As you click between your playlist, and your computer has seen those playlists dozens of times. You're just going through this wall of loading states all the time. So at a minimum, that's something I want to do better. So here's an idea of how fast Overtone looks like. PVH clapping over there, he's nerd sniped me into this by, I think a quote goes along the lines of next frame or money back. So I'm trying to live up to that. So yeah, but having once set this performance, now I need to make sure it stays at that level. So in a way, I'm building Overtone for people like me, or maybe some of people like you who really care about music, who care about great software. I want to have the same great user experience no matter where my music comes from. I think local first is a fantastic foundation to make that happen. And I want to go even further to support some power users use cases, whether it's DJs, whether it's curators, whether it's producers, or whatever you want to do with your music collection. So I want to support that. But maybe even more importantly, and I got to discover this over the last few years, is that, well, obviously there is no music without artists, and artists have a really hard time in today's setup where streaming pays less than ever, except for a teeny tiny fraction of artists at the very top. And I think there are better ways to go about that. And so I've started buying a lot more music on Bandcamp, supporting artists in a much more meaningful way directly, or supporting them on Patreon. But it's yet another tab in your browser. It's not part of your normal music consumption behavior. So that's something I want to deeply integrate into Overtone, that music enthusiasts that care about artists, that they have a convenient way to support them. So yeah, that wraps up why I'm building a new music app, many more niche reasons, but that's a rough overview. So let's get into some of the nerdy things, how I'm building it. So I have a pretty long list of things that I consider to be interesting of how I'm building Overtone. I have only so many minutes left to talk about some of them. So I've focused on a few aspects that I think are maybe the most foundational pivotal decisions for me, how I'm building Overtone, that could serve as inspiration for you all as you're thinking about designing your own apps. So I want to start out, given that we all spend, or I spend so much of my daily productive time in a web browser, and many apps start out at least to be used in this way. For example, I'm doing this presentation right now in Figma. I would have probably never installed Figma as a desktop app. I first got to know it in the web, etc. And it blew me away how fast it was back then. And then later I installed the desktop app. So at the very least, Overtone also needs to be really great in the web browser. And so there's no way around of just building this as a web app at its core. And building web apps that feel almost like native apps, that's really hard. Kind of building high quality apps on hard mode, particularly when it comes to performance. So performance is maybe the quick demo before illustrated that somewhat, is not just the the latency as you interact with like network dependent things, etc. But it's also just like as you click around and use the app, that it's not sluggish and lagging, etc. The more I want to build a power tool, and a power tool, there's going to be a lot of data, and the more data there is, the more work the computer needs to do. So keeping the app performant is a constant challenge, but I enjoy working on those challenges, and I've learned a few tricks now that help me to do so. So one of it is to keep as much work as possible off the main thread, and then the work that is happening on the main thread, to be very mindful about that. And in my case, I needed to go even to such a great length of building a main thread scheduler. So to like very carefully see, okay, how much time do I have in a given frame left to do some work? I put on that work, yield back to the renderer, and then continue doing the work. So, but that is allowing for sort of like the 60 or 120 FPS experience that I'm aiming for. Another one, typical bottleneck, is how rendering happens. Most web apps are built with DOM, and it's like you can get far enough with DOM, but that was a big performance blocker for me, particularly with lists, etc. And after having exceeded all the possibilities with virtual rendering and React, etc., I took a different approach and started embracing canvas-based options a lot more. So for tables and lists, etc., I'm picking like a more native rendering approach, which buys me a lot of headway to keep the UI threads happy and lean. Another one is offline support, and that's kind of like the web was born to be online in a way, and now it became sort of this massive app distribution platform. Now we want to have kind of the best of both worlds, but most tools really gear towards our bias towards everything being online. So now enabling that local first idea of that apps truly work offline, that is easier in native platforms than in the web. So in the web, you really need to fight a little bit against the common sense that you find in Stack Overflow and other places. So a big foundation of that is like embracing service workers and sort of like the PWA patterns. But I think a big mindset shift that has helped me is to really decouple network dependent things entirely as like an optional asynchronous task, and trying to architect the app that it can just in a synchronous way directly work. And then as you have network available, suck in the things that are useful, do the syncing, etc. And also treat images this way. So instead of like using an image tag, I don't use any image tags. I like draw everything to a canvas and download the images on a separate worker, store them locally, resize them in the right size I need. And that gives me a great performance and always works offline. So you see, I'm going a little bit above and beyond in some of the details, particularly for the web. I enjoy the challenge, and I think we can set a higher bar this way. There are many more challenges. A browser has usually multiple tabs, so thinking about the user experience when it comes to multiple tabs, what do you want to sync in terms of state? What do you want to keep individual per tab is an interesting question. Now that you ship your full app to the browser, where a database typically lives in the web app, you got to think about those pesky database migrations. How do you go about that? That ship a new app version, and so you can't just do that on whatever, a Saturday night when everyone is asleep and then roll back. You got to ship it, and it better works. So that's tricky. Then my arch enemy course. I'm ashamed. This is probably the only server I'm running right now is like a course proxy to integrate with all sorts of other things. And then also just making everything work across different browsers, looking at Safari. But yeah, so, and as I'm building Overtone, I've also come to realize I'm not just building a web app, I'm kind of building also like a web app engine in the same ways like a game engine is trying to make it easier to build games. Given I'm sort of like one of the first ones off on this path, I gotta pave a lot of new roads myself. And so as part of building Overtone, I think I'm also building a foundation that could be used for other apps. I'm mostly betting on TypeScript here together with Vite. I think that's a very productive stack. And for some of the performance critical parts, I'm using Rust with Wasm, and that's working really well. For rendering, I'm still mostly basing everything on React, but I've already mentioned that I'm resorting to more and more native rendering approaches where possible and where it makes a big difference. So that's something that that I can highly recommend looking into. So in regards to the data layer, this is where I've talked a little bit about in the past with this research project called Riffle. I'm now continuing this under the new name LiveStore. I'll go a little bit more into that in a moment. Storage-wise, for persistence, I am embracing OPFS, which when I started was a lot earlier, and now over the last few years has gotten more mature. There's still bugs, there's still incompatibilities, but I think it's a good time to start embracing it. And I know of quite a few production apps that already use it. As I mentioned before, oh, there's a little text overlay. As I mentioned before, I'm trying to decouple as much of the synchronous work and like asynchronous work. So I've built my own task scheduler, both for the main thread as well as moving work off the main thread on a web worker cluster that runs in your browser. It scales up and scales down. And I'm even trying to embrace some of the patterns from like durable workflows that you might know from Temporal, etc., and bring that into your web app. So, and last but not least, building all of that without knowing what the heck's going on would be pretty tricky. So I keep building also like my own dev tools. So just to give you a little idea of what that looks like, this is Overtone, and on the top right, just as an example, I've embedded my own like live meters to understand what is going on. So for example, you can see like how many live queries are happening, how many tasks are being scheduled, etc. And this is where, if my app kind of feels weird, this is where I get indication, yeah, that's the problem. So that's very useful. And then in regards to state management, this is where, together with Jeffrey Litt and Nicholas Schiefer, over the last 2.5 years, I was involved in this research paper about Riffle. Riffle is concluded now, and I'm continuing the work under a new name called LiveStore, which is a very client-centric data layer approach. That's all the foundation for Overtone. The idea is similar to like where Linear is using MobX, etc. That's similar to that, but it's all SQLite-based, reactive SQLite-based with sort of a signal layer to unify state management and data management. And I really care about it being as fast as possible. The secret sauce here that it runs also on the main thread and gives you a synchronous API that makes everything much simpler and gives you a transactional API. So this is roughly how it looks like. You have like for example, it works with React, but also with web components and other things. But in React, it looks like it does. That you have somewhere your entry point where you point to a LiveStore schema. Over there, you have a table definition that's sort of like a part of your schema definition where you can define SQLite tables, etc. And then in your React component, you can just use queries. So either you write your own SQL query with a query builder or raw SQL or however you want it. LiveStore also has like a couple of like utilities baked in here. And so this is where you get in a to-do app here, you get the to-do directly. There's no loading state, nothing. This is like instantly there. And if you run a mutation, it's also there on next render. And so that's I feel like the best of both worlds, where I get all the power from a SQL database in the web app, but also the fastness and simplicity you get from something like state management in React. And so that is the foundation for LiveStore. It supports persistence to OPFS or IndexedDB. The goal is also to make it agnostic to syncing providers. I started working on a few integrations there. And it is now available also for early access on GitHub if you're interested in that. Another major design decision for me was to decouple reads and writes. So in a way, this follows some of the ideas of event sourcing. So instead of writing to my SQLite database directly, I'm rather issuing a mutation. That mutation goes its own event log, but is then also interpreted and then turned into a SQLite write. And that helps me with all sorts of things. This is how I'm writing to the database and how many other things work. This makes it much easier for me to understand the system. It helps me with syncing and taming all of those distributed systems problems. It allows me to sidestep schema migrations altogether. Still have a trauma from that with Prisma. And it also makes it much easier to decouple the entire system, make it easier to test if there's a bug. I can just ask a user for their end log in my own my little app preview somewhere, just hydrates to the same state, and I can debug it very seamlessly. So that's very useful. And that has also then been the foundation for another system that emerged that was based on the question of like, how do I integrate my own local first data with data that I don't control, data coming from Spotify, etc. And so a traditional approach for that might rather be similar to what Thomas previously showed, is that in your React component, you issue a fetch and then you set the state, etc. And I haven't even dealt with error handling here. But the problem is with this is like if you reload, it starts with a blank page. So we want to do better in local first. So a naive approach could be that you say, okay, we keep the last persistent result around, but we still fetch it, and then we combine it. It might still flicker, and at the very least, it will re-render all the rows because we'll probably not carefully diff all the aspects, and so we'll just override it. Too much of a hassle otherwise. And so what I wanted to do better, and I wanted to all for the data to flow through that database. So I was thinking, could there be a little box that sits in between the Spotify API and my local database that everything flows through that? Almost like a syncing system, but for data I don't control. And so this is what I've started building then to power all the data integrations for Overtone as well, which I call DivStream. And the idea is to facilitate third-party data integration with the insight that instead of dealing with like those data snapshots all the time, it would be nice to rather also have an event log of events that I could subscribe to. And so this little box sucks in those snapshots, but then derives an event stream based on like some schema definitions. So here's a little illustration of that, where say this is for the same use case where you have like a playlist, Spotify playlist with tracks and albums and artists and so on. So you have and this kind of feels like GraphQL-esque, where you have an entry point and you fetch all sorts of things. So that's a snapshot from 2 days ago, and now we have a new snapshot where just a few things have changed. There's a new track, an artist has updated, and so on. And so instead of just getting this huge new snapshot for my UI to kind of figure out, now my database layer just gets a few new events for data coming externally. And that also means that if the app is being used offline, the entire thing just won't trigger, and the app will work as it worked the last time. So this is a pattern that I think could be quite promising for non-purely local first apps, but apps that need to integrate with external data as well. So if that's interesting to you, feel free to hit me up about that. So wrapping up the last few minutes, blazing through some of the open challenges that I'm still facing. Event sourcing in production. It's not live yet, and I haven't rolled it out at scale yet. So I need to see whether it's actually a useful foundation for syncing, and performance will be good at scale, and it will be not in the way for a good user experience. But it's looking promising so far, and also the developer experience I really like so far. Also mentioned already a few words about taming the web browsers. That continues to be an ongoing challenge. It's getting better, but it still requires quite a bit of work. And then also, particularly when you target different browsers, the DevTools are like in completely different states. Chrome is still leading the way there, in my opinion. And then I want to go even further and bring Overtone to mobile as well, probably using React Natives. A couple of UX related local first patterns that I think will need more of a spotlight is like, how do we deal with merge conflicts, undo, redo, that sort of like the evergreen local first patterns that I think need good best practices. But particularly here, as I'm combining local first data with cloud data, how do you integrate that? And how do you sync it? Do you sync it all up front Spotify's music collection, that's infeasible. So you need to do it either lazily or in the background, just in time. So figuring out patterns for that. And also search, that's sort of like a UI, UX related question. When you have insert search for all of your local results, but then you might want to merge search results coming from external sources that might just take 2 seconds to come in. And I don't like Notion's approach where just I want to click on something, a search result, and then it jumps down. So that's a question. And then also I hope to integrate like file systems somehow. What is a local first file system? Monetizing, Martin talked about it. I don't have a good idea for that yet. I'm leaning towards charging for the software itself somehow, but TBD, don't want to put the cart in front of the horse. And for now, I'm sustaining my development here through sponsorship, I'm open for consulting projects as it's somewhat related to what I'm doing. And I'm also considering bringing on some collaboration partners for some of those projects. And that wraps it up. Thank you so much.